So President Lee Jae-myung is set to return home after wrapping up his 4-day state visit to China. Meanwhile, the White House says the United States is now discussing options to acquire Greenland, including the use of military. For more on this, we're joined today by Professor Andrew Millard, Assistant Professor of International Relations at Changwon National University. Professor Millard, thanks for joining us this morning.
Good morning. Thanks for having me.
So this visit by President Lee Jae-myung was the first state visit by a South Korean president to China in almost a decade, right? How significant was his visit overall?
So you're right. This was the first state visit since 2017. Really overall a very significant visit, but significant for each country on a different level. So for the South Koreans, for President Lee, this visit was really about going to China and really rebuilding bilateral relations between South Korea and China, which for the past 10 years haven't really been that great. But then you also have on the regional level, various different security issues. So we have at the moment the tensions between China and Japan. We have the issue of Taiwan. We also have the issue of North Korea, which President Lee, South Korea really wants China to take a big role in bringing North Korea back to the table for various negotiations with South Korea, but also with the U.S. And then we have on the global level, of course, all of these issues with trade and security regarding the United States. So for South Korea, it was very much about the bilateral relations, getting this good relationship with China. But for China, and Xi Jinping made this very clear, it was about making sure that South Korea stays on the side of China. So a very significant thing.
Right. And more broadly, another major issue for China right now is the Trump administration's intervention in Venezuela. As you know, Beijing has been the biggest buyer of Venezuelan oil and its largest investor. How might the capture of Maduro affect U.S. China relations and sort of reshape the geopolitical landscape?
So you're right. So over the past sort of 20, 30 years, China has been really pushing its influence, not just in Venezuela, but really in Latin America, Central South America as the whole. So in terms of this capture of Maduro, what are we likely to see for China? In terms of economic impacts, right now it's a little bit uncertain exactly as to how those investments will be affected. But for the geopolitical situation, this could be very serious. Now, there's two ways to look at this. Firstly, the United States has given a very clear warning to any country in Latin America that if you're not on the side of the US, we are going to take action against you. So this may force several countries to really sort of look again at their relations with China. On the other hand, for China, this could be an opportunity to say, look, we are now the stable country. The United States, they're the ones being a little bit more erratic, whereas China, we're following the multilateral rules-based order, so we are the more stable country, stay on the side of us. Now, in the worst case, if we come back to oil, if Venezuela is no longer going to be supplying China with oil, this may force the Chinese to look for other sources for oil, and therefore this may push China closer to other U.S. adversaries like Russia, Iran, and so on. So this could have very big implications.
Right, and U.S. President Donald Trump has been saying the United States needs Greenland for defense, and the White House actually said this morning that Washington is discussing options to acquire Greenland. So could Greenland be next, and what would the European Union be able to protect it?
Right. So for the past year, and I think we should even say that this is not a Donald Trump policy. America, if you go back in history, has always been looking at Greenland. There's been different periods in the past where it's tried to buy Greenland from Denmark, but has been rejected. So this is not just purely a Donald Trump administration policy. However, Donald Trump has been quite aggressive, even in his first term, but now over the past year, in saying that they need Greenland for security. That doesn't make sense because The US has military bases in Greenland with Denmark's permission. Denmark and the US are both part of NATO, so they're allies in the same country. It doesn't really make sense for security, but it needs it for the resources. For the European Union, could the European Union protect it? The simple answer is no. Simply because the European Union does not have its own military. So for security and military, there's no way it could help. It could potentially give some financial support and diplomatic support. But as you just mentioned before we came on air, right now, there's only a handful of countries showing their diplomatic support. What the European Union really needs to do is have every single member state of the EU together pushing back against the US, having strong diplomatic support.
I see. And it's not just Greenland, because Trump is threatening Colombia and its president and described Cuba as ready to fall. Do you think North Korea may also view the capture of Maduro as a warning or a potential threat?
No. So potentially as a warning, I think maybe North Korea will be looking at this just because the US has shown its capabilities, what it's capable of doing anywhere in the world in capturing this president. However, we need to remember that Venezuela, Greenland, these countries, this is very much the focus of the Western Hemisphere. So going back to the Monroe Doctrine, which Donald Trump is now calling the Donroe Doctrine. So North Korea is not in the Western Hemisphere, so that counts it out. But also, if we look at Greenland, Venezuela, potentially also Colombia and so on, these countries, again, they have resources. So when the US takes that risk of going in, using potentially military to take control, it has something to gain from it. With North Korea, it's not in the Western Hemisphere. And also, would there really be huge resources to gain from any military action? Probably not. So for the North Koreans, I don't think they would be looking at this as a real threat.
I see. All right, Professor Millard, thank you so much for your insight this morning. We appreciate it.
Thank you.